Well, welcome back, everybody. I am Marcio Sierra. I am the pastor of Lighthouse Church and also the president of Lighthouse Church and Schools. And it's really an honor to be here with all of you. We're in the last session, the last panel of this day. It's been an amazing day. I've had the opportunity to actually listen to all of the sessions. So I want to actually thank Madison 365 and the whole team there working for this. Thank you to the sponsors for, help us put this together. And I'm excited today because, we have another panel. We're going to talk to people who are leading nonprofits during this time that we're living in, difficult times, interesting times. And let me just introduce the people that we have. We have Michael Johnson, the CEO of Boys and Girls Club of Dane County. Thank you, Michael, for being with us. We have Errol Buford, president of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. And then we also have Michael McMillan. He is the president and the CEO of Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis. So thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. And, we want to start, and I want to let you guys brag a little. I know there's a lot of young people that are watching us. There's people that maybe are, want to be inspired by the people that are in this panel. And, one thing that I want to ask you is what's something that you're doing right now? If you want to add something more to your resume, what is something that you're doing right now, in your organization that is actually keeping you excited, that you wake up every morning, I'm excited about this thing that I'm doing. So everybody just take a minute. You can say something more about yourself, but just share about something that is exciting you that you're doing right now. Michael Johnson, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I've been doing this work for, 25 years. And as a kid that grew up, in the projects in Chicago, what gets me excited every day is being able to get up every single day and to raise resources for kids who live in marginalized circumstances like me. If you look at today's Capital Times newspaper, there's a story about how the chancellor of the university talked about how Boys and Girls Clubs is help UW this year create the most diverse freshman class in the history of the university. So being able to help young people go to college, being able to create new facilities for young people and families in this community, and being able to forge new partnerships and relationships, that's what gets me up every day. If I was just running the traditional Boys and Girls Club, just running after school programs, that wouldn't excite me. So doing new things, better things, broader things that's going to impact our community in a profound way is what inspired me and make me get up every day to do this work on a regular basis.
Good. Errol, you want to share with us?
Yeah, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is exciting for me, being a lifelong Wisconsinite until 3 years ago when I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So this is really exciting. So I've run 4 nonprofits now and 2 workforce boards, one community industry association, and now we're running CALE. That's the acronym for the title that Marcio gives. And what's exciting about, I'm on day 3, by the way, of this new position. And what's exciting about why I took the job and what's exciting about it is so CALE is the intermediary between higher education, community colleges, 4-year baccalaureates, et cetera, and industry creating agreements for adult learners. So basically, this is why I'm excited. I get to work with higher education and employers in industry to make sure there's jobs attached to graduates. So think about folks that you all out there that are in college right now or think about going to college. You may know what you want to major in, but you don't know what that's going to lead to. And so my hope and my excitement is to be able to, when you graduate, to say that job is already lined up with my college.
Good. Thank you. How about you, Michael McMillan? What keeps you excited? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Well, good afternoon. First and foremost, it is truly a pleasure to be a part of this panel. I want to thank my friend Michael Johnson, who spent time in his illustrious career earlier in life in St. Louis. And we miss him to this very day. His energy, his hard work, his passion, his commitment, his vision, and his willingness to do any and everything that he can to make a difference in the lives of the people that need it the most is definitely something that you all are blessed to have with you and that we miss in the form of him not being here. But he does even still periodically come back to St. Louis, still give back, still make a difference, and still reach out. And so we thank him for his love for our city as well as yours. In terms of what really excites me, the same passion that Michael has is the same one that I have and that we share. And what we're doing right now at the Urban League in the form of our new headquarters that we have just moved into for the first time, changing headquarters in almost half a century, is something that's very dynamic. Right in the heart of the Black community, we purchased the old regional headquarters of Sears and Roebuck, which is a 205,000 square foot facility, and phase 2 is a 45,000 square foot facility that's right by it. So combined, we would then have 250,000 square feet to do all of the 55 different programs of the Urban League, but also have a crown jewel in the heart of North St. Louis, which is the heart of the Black community, for new businesses, for resources, for institutions, and for help, so that people know that they have a place to go to get everything that they need to be independent, but then also a place where they will be able to shop, have jobs, have something positive in the neighborhood, have resources, and 3 cultural centers within the complex about African-American history, African history, and giving people a sense of their awareness in St. Louis's contribution, not only to the country, but to the world.
Gentlemen, I thank you for what you guys are doing. And, one thing, today is April 14th, and I believe about a year and a month exactly, when we started hearing about COVID. And at this time, we don't know if this is going to be 2 days on lockdown. We don't know if it's going to be a month. We don't know what's happening. And so how did this affect your organizations? What happened when you hear this? How do you have to change things? And Errol, I know that you say you've been 3 days in the new organization. You can share about what happened in the organization that you're currently right now, or what you were doing before. And go ahead, anybody can just jump in. When you heard about what we were going on, what happened in your organization? What came to mind?
Yeah, so I would say I followed Mike McMillan on Facebook and took a lot of cues from Mike early on and other leaders that I respect, around the country. When the pandemic hit, I had to decide whether or not I was going to focus on Boys and Girls Clubs first, or focus on the needs of the community first. And so I've always lived by, you focus on the community first, focus on your organization second, and then the needs of your own personal interests last, that you'll be blessed in the process. So we decided to, the day that the city and the county shut down, we called Madison 365, and then we worked with a group called Feed Kitchen and began feeding young people all over the city. That's something traditionally that Boys and Girls Clubs don't do. We also decided to launch a campaign with Selfless Ambition and United Way, and we ended up raising about $2 million in 1 week and distributed those funds to 51 organizations. And I remember at the time there were stakeholders at the Boys and Girls Club saying, is this something we should be doing? Will this hurt the Boys and Girls Clubs? And again, I'm a firm believer, if you do right by the community will do right by you. And as a result of that, we paid the bills of over 7,000 people. We fed first responders. We helped 61 college students get home from school. We fed over 100-some thousand people. Marcio, with your help, we gave away 1.5 million face masks and hand sanitizers. So the work that we've been doing over the last year have been out of the box work that you traditionally don't see, Boys and Girls Clubs do. And I would tell you, we have weathered the storm, right? So even though our funding pie looked very, very different this year, not only did we swim, our organization and our donors started supporting us in more ways than we could ever think of. I think about the $1 million in cleats that we got from the NFL Combine. We had donors from New York, donors from the Boston, people we've never even met before who wanted to contribute to the work that we were doing. You look at what happened this summer during the civil protests. We ended up raising money to support those businesses that was being looted, but we also raised money to support the people who were there, protesting. And as a result of that, we're working on a project now. I just had a meeting this morning with the Milwaukee Bucks. We'll be announcing, we've already raised $250,000 to have a statue of the first African-American woman in this nation to be erected at a state capitol in the United States. And so we're raising $250,000 for that to be able to happen. And this is typical stuff that you don't see your local neighborhood Boys and Girls Club doing. And this is just one of many ways that we've had to pivot to respond to the challenges that we see in our community.
Errol, Michael?
Well, basically, I could say ditto to everything Michael Johnson said, because we were in the same type of environment. St. Louis is very similar to Madison. And if you look at the needs, they're the same. Sadly, COVID reduced people to basic survival. How do I have food to put on the table? How do I keep my house? How do I keep my gas and electric going? How do I take care of my children and my family? And so we pivoted as well. And I know from what I have seen on Michael's social media, the other thing, of course, that we all had to do was do it in a manner we had never done it before. So the traditional outreach center model no longer worked. So we had to all pivot to these large scale mass distribution centers where people drive through and then, pop their trunks and you put everything in there. We've never done that before. And for those that couldn't drive, that we did home deliveries, senior citizen building deliveries, church deliveries, and everything we could for the disabled and individuals that couldn't get to those events, and then tried to amplify it. And, just like Michael, we stepped out on faith because there was literally no funding for any of this because none of us had ever even contemplated the tragedy of what has taken place in the form of COVID. So whether it was the food, toiletry, and PPE distributions, where we had a very, very similar number of recently having eclipsed the 100,000 family that we have served, to then the rental and mortgage assistance, utility assistance, Head Start family assistance program, and the rest. So between all of that and the existing relief programs we had, you talked about pumping $10 million of revenue into the economy to try to help people to survive. And of course, the needs still persist. So we're not out of COVID yet. We still have a number of people that work for the hotel industry, restaurants, the airport, the convention center, retail, and other places that have not been able to find a job yet, and they need our assistance. And so we're going to continue to do that as long as we can, as much as we can. And as Michael mentioned, we had the same blessing. When people see what you're doing and they understand the magnitude of it, and the Lord has blessed you to have partners like 365 to get the word out about what you're doing, then people are willing to give. And so we had the exact same experience as the Boys and Girls Club, where individuals went online and gave anything from $5 to $100,000 that had never given to the Urban League before and had never been a part of our mission, but saw what was happening and how we were able to galvanize people. And luckily, I think we now, as we hopefully see the end of this year, we'll be able to chart a path where we can hopefully get people back on track to where they used to be before COVID began.
Errol, you want to share something?
Absolutely. And being in the first week of the new role, which I'll touch on for about 10 seconds, I spent the past 3+ years as the head of the Pittsburgh Workforce Development Board and the system. So at the onset of the pandemic, we operate 2 job centers, for instance, and a few affiliate centers. So they, like anything else, they were closed down and affected, and thousands of people were, obviously dislocated and out of work. And so it's kind of hard to have a system where there's nowhere to go. And so I took an approach where, not uncommon to most communities, where you start a task force. So I tried to do something a little differently. We started that in March of last year, called the Ready to Work Workforce COVID Workforce Recovery, and tried to get the right players involved. So Mayor Pittsburgh, the county executive representatives, the business community and philanthropy co-chaired it. We brought higher ed to the table, community leaders to the table. It was a small group of 9 of us. And I said, we need to have phases of recovery. but we can't do it in a traditional workforce board way because there's too much going on for one of us to try to lead this. We all have to do it collectively. But obviously I had a big voice in that. And so we did it in 3 phases. An immediate response to what's going on. How do we deal with the child care situation? I want to give credit to our Boys and Girls Club of Pittsburgh, who stepped up with the use of their buildings for child care situations. So love our club family. We also dealt with the issues of folks who are on unemployment rolls and how to get them services while everything is shut down. So those are a couple of examples of immediate response things. The other phase is what we call the intermediate phase. So once you get past some of those major immediate situations that had to happen, we started thinking about, all right, everyone's doing stuff, but let's make sure it's an equation as opposed to the community's doing that, higher ed's over there doing this. So let's come together. Whatever's missing, we lead it or create something, and whatever's happening, let's go support who's doing whatever. I'll give you a good example. All our economic development leaders in the greater Pittsburgh area, our CDFI, our county economic development, we're providing loans to small businesses and Black businesses, et cetera. We said, well, if they're going to help them maintain or grow, why don't we make sure we put some workforce dollars on the table or some wage subsidy dollars on the table so they can hire people or maintain people? That's just one example. What also came out of that was the development of a Black business accelerator to support Black businesses that were still looking for contracts to be able to grow. But most importantly, how do they bond and also get the right support that they need to stay viable as companies? Fourth one was working with IBM through their Reignite the Economy strategy. We were the first city to launch the Reignite. Now I believe it's in 5 other cities. And so, but that was because we were organized and ready to take that on from a skills building in the tech sector, which is obviously a major sector in Pittsburgh. And then lastly, we brought some federal emergency dollars, dislocated worker dollars to Pittsburgh to the tune of about $5 million that we were able to work with our state labor department, work with all those other departments I mentioned earlier. So that was kind of immediate phase. And lastly, we'd be remiss if we didn't have a long-term planning phase. And so we wanted to take advantage of all that was coming together during this pandemic. Can't let a good crisis go to waste. So that's what we always say, right? Well, how does Pittsburgh want to look coming out of this pandemic? And so now there's long-term planning with a strategy called Advancing Pittsburgh based on the Advancing Cities model from JP Morgan Chase. So how do we mimic what they're looking for in that process? Well, let's build ourselves now. Let's rebuild ourselves now coming out of this pandemic. And so I'm really excited that Ready to Work has taken off. And again, it's what it really brought more than anything else is it brought support to people that needed it. It brought support to businesses that needed it, particularly Black businesses. But lastly, it brought folks together that traditionally hadn't worked together and said, if we cannot do this alone, we all must come together and get to work. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And then quick note for my new position, obviously, who was affected more than higher education? I don't know. The folks out here listening, who are college students or lifelong learners who have this now virtual learning world and what happens from there. So we're still feeling the effects of that. Who knows where some of the new policy decisions will go that affect higher education? And again, in the end, how do we come together and make these kind of new ideas connect and click moving forward for folks that you all work with?
Good. So here we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm thinking more last year. So we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's overwhelming. We're afraid for ourselves, our families. I know that for many of us who are working in nonprofit organizations, for me, for example, I was busier than ever. And to be honest, even though my family was on lockdown, I had to be out on the streets. I was trying to figure out, how to help the families. People were knocking at the church. So here we have a pandemic, is affecting disproportionately the Black and the Hispanic community. Then comes George Floyd and everything that is happening. I mean, it's a little overwhelming. Everything that has happened last year, has that changed the goals or the way that you think, the vision or the way that you think about your organization? Are you going back to the old way of doing things? Are you changing things? Are you having a board meeting and saying, let's really think about who we are and what we're doing? What has happened since? with your organization specifically?
Yeah, so I think to be an effective organization, our organization had just finished a 5-year strategic plan, literally months before the pandemic hit. And to me, strategic plans is our moving target, right? You know, if you create a strategic plan, you spend a year working on it and it sit on the shelf, you always got to adjust those plans based on what's happening in the marketplace, right? And so, you know, for us, it was, you know, how do we get buy-in from our stakeholders? How do we communicate what the need is? And then how do we execute on it, right? And so when you look at, you know, what happened this year, I never thought that the Boys and Girls Club would have a space on the square downtown across the street from the Capitol. I'm pretty sure Michael McMillan probably didn't think that he would have a 200,000 square foot facility, you know, in St. Louis. You look at what Earl is doing and the new job that he took on, it's probably going to look very, very different than what it did a year ago than it looks right now. So I think we have to learn to adjust. I think we have to listen to stakeholders in the community, but also we're going to be impactful and resourceful. We got to hear about the people that we represent and those who we are there to empower and to serve. At Boys and Girls Clubs, we know moving forward that we have to provide more virtual programming. We also know that because of this pandemic, and even before this pandemic, that the mental health services in our clubs and beyond our clubs are going to look very, very different, and we're going to have to respond accordingly. We also know, even though we have 1,600 young people in college right now, we also know in the United States that only 27% of working age adults have college degrees. So what about those young people who do not go to college? And so we know moving forward, the $1.5 million that we invest in the schools, we're now going to have to double down and probably invest $1.5 million a year in skilled trades to teach kids how to become plumbers and carpenters and lawyers, and HVAC mechanics and lawyers too, right? And so we have to think very, very differently out the box to make sure that young people in our community can become self-sufficient, and that running traditional after-school programs, I don't think you could transform kids' lives unless you can touch them during the day, touch them in the evenings, touch their families on weekends. And that's what I want to see the Boys and Girls Clubs become in the months and years to come.
I would say, I totally agree with everything that Michael said. And I think for any of us that have legacy organizations, we have to always learn how to pivot and be what the community needs us to be when they need us to be that. And if we don't do that, you know, in our case, we'll be a part of a Black History exhibit of an urban league that used to exist and used to do a lot of great things for the community and now is no longer there. So it is incumbent upon us to, as Michael said, listen to the people, hear what they need, do every single thing that we can. And as you mentioned, from the church standpoint, all of us were in a position where people needed us more than they ever did before. And all of us had to make a conscious decision, as you mentioned, that we would even put our own safety at risk, because a crisis shows the true character of a person. And you have one or two choices. You can either rise to the highest level of your abilities, or you can retreat and wait until it's over with. But the community will always remember what you did or what you did not do. And doing nothing is doing something. And so we all had to make that choice to do more than ever. And the Lord blessed us to be able to do that. I think as Michael talked about the different services and the different things that they have done, he's absolutely right. We did not have this as a part of our planning process in terms of moving a headquarters for the first time in almost 50 years and all of the things involved in that. But the times present us with the opportunity and the capacity and the need. And so we decided to act on them. And I think that all of our legacy entities, especially those that are part of national organizations, have to do as much as we humanly can to be that source for the community that they need us to be.
Michael.
I'm sorry. I like Michael McMillan's term pivot, because I think that's what we all had to do, and pivot with the focus. And so the Pittsburgh work, when we created the Ready to Work Task Force, one of the opportunities that it presented itself is, if we come at things from a DEI and REI lens and the work with those stakeholders, that's one thing. But I think in light of what's happened between the pandemic and George Floyd and the social conversation that's happening, is I can say in my 25-year history, I've never had more meetings where people say Black. It wasn't diversity causes or anything else. It was, no, how do we affect Black things? And so I appreciated that pivot, led with that pivot in some situations. And I think we all can attest to that, whether we've done it consistently or not. It's that opportunity's presented itself. And so that's why when I mentioned the Black Business Accelerator that's moving in Pittsburgh area, that would have been called that a year ago. It would have been a minority business movement or some other thing. And so I think that was a major pivot that's happening. And again, what's the sustainability going to be? Well, that's to be determined. But right now, that is the way it's going.
And if I could add something, Marcia, if you don't mind, was something Mike shared early on. When the pandemic first hit, I remember my wife was concerned about my personal health. Right? She was like, "We don't know what this virus is about. You have 3 kids at home. You have a wife. You have a family. Do you really need to be out there?" And I remember some of my board members saying the same thing, was saying, "Mike, we need you in the long haul. Please be careful. You don't have to be out there." But I couldn't fundamentally ask Boys and Girls Club staff to be out there on the front lines while I'm sitting working from home. That just didn't feel right to me. So I assured my wife, I said, I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself. I'll be safe. But our community need our leadership. And this is not the time for leaders to retreat. And I think Mike is right? People will remember, what you did during those days, and people know what you did and didn't do. And I think that, given these were unprecedented times, in our country, and people needed to see leadership, they needed to feel leadership. And there was hundreds and hundreds of leaders throughout our state and beyond who stepped up every single day, whether it was protesting, whether it was feeding people in need, whether it was people like Earl that was working, with the legislature or with the workforce development boards to make sure that, people were working. It was a challenge early on, and we all had to make personal decisions whether or not we were going to be on the front lines or not. And I remember when the protest was happening with George Floyd, right? And at first I remember there were some people criticizing me because I said, I'm not going out there with 4,000 or 5,000 people marching. And I found myself on social media watching it all. And I remember tearing up, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going. I feel like I need to be out there. And that was the pivot for me, right? When that event occurred, I remember watching the video from my cell phone as I was walking into the grocery store. And I cried watching how this man lost his life. And I decided as a nonprofit leader that I was going to challenge all the police chiefs in our county. And I wanted them to issue a statement immediately because of the trauma that Black people were feeling. And so I wanted them to know majority of our police chiefs in America are white men. And a lot of times when Black men are killed, you don't hear from the chiefs of police in the area. So I wanted to use my platform to hold them accountable, and to their credit, they stepped up, had a town hall meeting. And then Ahmaud Avery, when he was killed, same thing. We wanted young people from Georgia to speak to young people from Wisconsin. So sometimes we have to utilize our platform to be able to engage people, to speak up on issues that make us uncomfortable. And sometimes when you go out and do things, there'll be people who will agree with you. There'll be people that will take shots at you, but that's leadership, right? You got to take the shots that come with being a leader in our community. You take the praise, but you also got to take the shots when they come.
Yeah. And as a follow-up, to this question, all 3 of you, you're leaders in the community. All 3 of you are fundraisers. And when all 3 of you have said the word pivot. So now in your own personal life, how do you deal with, pivoting, when it comes to, for example, one of the things that I was doing, with Lighthouse and and my friend Marcus Allen with Mount Zion, we decided, a lot of people, can't pay the rent. Let's try to raise some funds. There's a lot of other things. I'm trying to get computers for my children at the school. But I said, let's raise some funds. And we had a goal of about $50,000. In about a month, we have about, $250,000. And some people are telling me, okay, Marcio, it's time to pivot. That's enough. But every month we help people in April with rent, but then comes May and they're saying, okay, we need more rent. So, and even in your personal life, I was in a Zoom meeting with a bunch of pastors, and we were praying with each other. And some pastors were saying, pastors not of color, and they were saying, this is kind of like a sabbatical, and we're spending time with our families, and I get to read a book, and this is great with the families. And I'm thinking, a sabbatical? I've never been as busy, in my life. Well, like, what are we talking about? But it also made me think, we're in the middle of a pandemic. My family is worried. I'm not spending time with my family. So how do you deal with that in your own personal life, but also with fundraising? When is it time to pivot? When is it time to say, okay, enough is enough. I need to switch. I need to change directions. How do you do that, even with family? Errol, let's start with you.
That's a great question. I think from a fundraising standpoint, I'll start there. Then I have a little different situation with family. Again, you try to take advantage of the opportunity, and I'm happy to say that. But at times it's a tough thing to say. But if you have to have different conversations about the end game and the ultimate goal, but the opportunity is to talk to different resource leaders and resource stakeholders, and one, if they're supporting your efforts or the efforts here to solve this issue or to help this issue, that's one conversation, and that's easy. It's those who, like Mike Johnson said earlier, who aren't saying much. Like, how do you get them to open their wallets, open their portfolios? And so those are the conversations I enjoyed having over this past year. It's like, what are you doing on the sideline? Why are you not involved? Well, if you don't want your name in paper, that's one thing, but we'll still take your resources and use them for the cause. And so those are easier conversations to have if there wasn't that, if we weren't pivoting around this pandemic and things of that nature. But that was kind of our philosophy, at least in the Pittsburgh area, to get those funders at the corporate level, philanthropy, even some of the public resources that were earmarked for something, but not earmarked for the things that were needed. And so those are tough conversations to have, but they're easy at the same time, because what are you doing? How are you contributing? If not, we'll do it for you. That's one. Family is tougher for me because I lived in Pittsburgh. My family's all in Wisconsin, so I had to make an effort. I guess one thing is since we're all in a virtual working world for the most part, I was able to spend a decent amount of time with my family, and like most Wisconsin, especially Milwaukeeans, were greatly affected by the pandemic, health-wise. And so I had a number of relatives early in the pandemic that passed or were in critical condition. And then, the second wave, so I had a number of individuals that passed away in December. So I tried to spend as much time as I can coming back home safely to make sure that things were happening in the right direction for my parents and my siblings, nieces, and nephews, and et cetera, et cetera. But I had to take advantage of the opportunity of having remote and virtual work to be home quite a bit.
Michael McMillan, what was your experience?
In our case, luckily, St. Louis is one of the most generous regions in the country. Despite us being about the 20th or 21st largest region in the country, we're generally in the top 7 of charitable giving. And so with that being the case, and the fact that we have the biggest Urban League board that ever was or ever will be, with 75 members, we lean a lot on our board to try to provide resources and the rest. And they helped us initially to do that, public campaigns and any number of other things in terms of how we, again, pivoted from a financial standpoint and took resources and tried to stretch them as much as we could, and a huge amount of volunteerism and a huge amount of partnerships that led to the movement that we've been able to put together over the past year. when you talk about, what has happened with our families, I think bluntly, all of us who have been out here in the field and have been out in the office and never closed down because we were all essential services and we're still with the public every day. In my case, I did not see members of my family for months because I didn't want to put them at risk, because I knew that I was going in the office every day, and on the weekends, we did 22 weeks in a row of these large scale giveaways with up to 5,000 people driving through and 250 volunteers. And with as many people as we saw, especially in the Black community, to get sick, to die, and have very bad cases of COVID, I didn't want to put them at risk. And so it was a matter of trying to connect with them virtually because, I love and cherish them more than anything in the world and didn't want to put them in jeopardy. And I think it was a sacrifice, obviously, that all of us in the not-for-profit world have done, but obviously people all over the world in every industry have sacrificed. And, there are 7.7 billion stories of sacrifice in this world right now in terms of what has transpired in the past year. But hopefully, good Lord willing, we will see our way to an end this year of those sacrifices.
Michael Johnson, you have something to add?
Yeah, I would say, my wife ain't no joke, right? So I remember during the pandemic, I'll answer the question first around pivot. The reason we responded so quickly, I worked for the city of Philadelphia. I worked in Chicago Public Schools and worked in some of these large government bureaucracies. And when you have a pandemic or a crisis in a community, sometimes it takes our government some time to organize. So we knew we had to respond within a matter of days. And our organization, I would say, is frugal enough that during our governance structure, all I had to do was get buy-in from, we have 30 board members and about 75 committee members. So getting them to buy into whatever our plan was going to be critical. So we knew that, if we were able to raise resources quickly to dispatch food over the city to kids, to give our government and our local municipalities time to respond to the crisis. And that's how we knew we would support it. We ended up doing it longer than that. As it came to my family, I remember my wife called me one day and she said, "Baby, I love you, but you can't come home." She said, "I watched you on TV and your face mask was not all the way over your nose." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, so she videotaped me this clip and was like, "Nope, your nose was exposed, so I booked you a hotel." So I stayed at the Madison Concourse for 17 and a half days.
Oh,
it was
wow.
right around Christmas time. If people recall, I think we ended up spending almost $70,000 or $80,000 on Christmas, taking people on shopping sprees at Target. And we gave away a couple of cars. And my wife was like, "I love what you're doing, but I want to make sure that you stay safe." And she booked me a hotel. And so I learned from that. And I said, so I ended up taking, I think she made me take 3 or 4 COVID tests before I came home. So and rightfully so, she should have, because we have 3 very, very young kids. And I want to be in it for the long run with them. I want to see them, graduate from high school and graduate from college. And she wanted to make sure that I was protecting myself. And the greatest asset I have in my family is my wife and my kids. And they're just as important as our work. And sometimes we get so intrigued into being of service for others that we put our families on the back burner. And we got to make sure that they're a priority, just like everything else.
Yes. And one thing we need to remember, usually by the time you're burned out, your spouse has been burned out for about a year or 2.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talking about fundraising. So I'm sure there's many people watching right now that maybe they're thinking about starting a fundraising. Maybe they just started a fundraising, something small. They're trying to figure out the board. If you're in Madison, it seems like someone has a vision, they start a fundraising, a nonprofit. So the question is, has fundraising changed because of COVID and everything that has happened, with the racial injustices? Has it changed? What would you tell people that are trying to do fundraising that they need to do now? And is this change for the long run, or you think it's going to pivot back to what it used to be? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I'll be happy to go. unless Michael Earl want to go first this time.
You, bro.
All right. So I would say, fundraising is I call it a lifelong learning experience, right? You always got to be willing to pivot. You got to always be willing to change. And when you're a fundraiser, if you're the lead person raising fundraising initiatives, my advice is you got to be to cast a vision and inspire people. A lot of people think in Madison that I'm a great fundraiser. I think I'm an okay fundraiser, but I've learned I'm probably a better community organizer. I know how to organize people. And so if you want to raise a significant amount of money, you got to have all the right people on the bus that will help you raise resources, right? And so we haven't missed any of our targets this year. We've exceeded our targets beyond measure. And that's because I've hired people who are smarter than me. I've placed and worked with a board of directors who are diverse, talented in so many different ways, right? And our board, just like Mike shared, is we do board report cards. And so we don't want people on our board for the sake of their name. People have to earn the right to sit in their chair. I have to earn the right to sit in this chair. Every employee that works at Boys and Girls Clubs have to earn the right to sit in that chair, because there's too much dependent on us to be able to help those who really need us the most. And so I would also say that education is also a lifelong experience, right? As a kid that grew up in a project, I couldn't read, I couldn't write. When I went to University of Minnesota, I ended up leaving because I couldn't compete collegiately, and ended up going to Malcolm X College. It took me 4.5 years to get an associate's degree. Then I ended up getting my bachelor's and my master's, and I'm still going to school, right? So, to be a good fundraiser, I went to the Center for Philanthropy at Indiana University to become a certified fundraising executive, because I wanted to not only have practical experience, but I wanted the educational experience to complement it. Next month, I'm going to Harvard University to get a certification in nonprofit strategic management at 44 years of age. And I believe the only way you continue to sharpen your knife is to continue to be sharpened by other people and to learn from different experiences. And I would tell you, a lot of people think because of our visibility at Boys and Girls Clubs, our clubs, when I took over 11 years ago, we had a deficit. We had 18 employees. We've consistently grown from 18 employees to almost 200, from 2 locations to 14 locations, from being in 2 cities to now being in 2 counties, in Dane and Walworth County, from going from a $1.1 million budget to a $7 million, operation, from going from 1,800 kids to 7,500 young people in Dane County. But you don't get there by doing it by yourself. You have to set forth plans. You have to put forth a business plan on how you're going to execute on the dreams that you forecast for your organization and for your community. And I think that in Madison, whether you're in Madison or St. Louis or in Pittsburgh, if you have the passion, if you're willing to learn and you surround yourself around the right people, you will do phenomenal things in your city, in your state, and in your country.
Errol, how about you?
First, I'm glad Michael Johnson went first. I think he did a fantastic job of laying out the outline of what it takes to fundraise in general, but also during troubling times like this past year. So, a couple things on that. One, I've always believed in what I call blended funding model, where you pick from a lot of different sources, you bring a lot of different players to the table. And running the workforce board, you're also a funder. And so sometimes it's easier to ask for resources or ask for support when you already have those dollars to pilot something or to support something or fill in gaps. So I try to pivoting and leverage is really the key here. And one, pivoting the conversations about who, I mentioned this earlier, who hasn't been involved in the past. Well, now you need to get yourself involved either with your time, your talent, or your treasure. I'll take your treasure in this situation and use it for you. I also use the leverage of the situation to establish a funders collaborative, where basically organize the philanthropic funders in our market to sit at the table together, which they hadn't done, and say, all right, we're going to some issues together, and here's some ideas on how to start that. And so that's why I said pivoting and leverage becomes important in this fundraising conversation. And lastly, also, there's a likability factor. So if you're liked, and I know the two Michaels are very well liked by a variety of funders. Why, in addition to their skill and their acumen, they're also liked and trustworthy. And the fact that there's 3 Black leaders here, what's the thing we're always on the lookout for? Well, how's your fiscal acumen? And we have to demonstrate that twofold, And I think we've all done that at a pretty strong clip for all of our careers. And there's that likability and trust that we say we're going to do something that's going to happen, and it's going to be happening with the greatest fiscal acumen possible. So
that's real. That's real.
I totally agree with everything that Earl and Michael said, and this is a hard thing to say, but I will say this to the people that are in the, watching audience and may have an idea, may have the passion, the desire, and really want to do something significant. The chances are, I would say 99+% that whatever you want to do, someone else is already doing it. And that it is really not necessary for you to go out and create your own 501c3. Because in St. Louis, we have almost 3 million people, but we have 17,200 incorporated not-for-profits. And sadly, we still have racism, we still have sexism, we still have homophobia, we have police shootings, we have crime, we have poverty, and we have many issues that need to be addressed, even with the enormous amount of work that all 17,200 of us are doing. And so whatever your idea is, I would really challenge you to find out who is doing that work and partner with them. Maybe it starts off as volunteering. Maybe it turns into a profession. Maybe it turns into being on the board of directors. But we do not suffer because we have a lack of incorporated 501c3 organizations. And then the other thing, if you really then drill down even more in the Black community, how many Black institutions do we have that have lasted over 100 years, that have the wherewithal to continue, no matter who the president is, and do the work that is needed to be done in the community? And sadly, we have a lot of entities and organizations that are focused on an individual. So if this was the Mr. Buford Foundation or the Michael Johnson Foundation or the Michael McMillan Foundation, it likely will die with us. But if you have, the work, so when you're dealing with a workforce board that is set in place by the official government of that particular community, it's not going to go away. The Boys and Girls Club is not going to go away. The Urban League is not going to go away. So supporting something that has the long-term ability to keep giving back, keep making a difference, keep helping. Because the other thing is all of us are raising money for expenses that are very difficult to get. No one ever says to us, I want to sponsor the janitor, so let me give $50,000 so I can pay for the janitor. Or I want to be the sponsor of the gas bill. Just send me all your gas bills from last year and I will pay that. But in order to run a not-for-profit, you have to do all of those things. And that administrative funding is very, very difficult to come by. It's very hard to keep. No one wants to fund those types of things. They want to fund big ticket programs. So I would say don't spend a lot of time trying to create something new. Join something that exists. And then the other question is when you asked, I think, how things will change, at least in St. Louis, there's been a very hard look at the special event paradigm that all of us in the not-for-profit world benefit from. Because when you talk about that discretionary funding, a lot of us get that from our special events. And I know that I've seen a lot of companies now that are not really excited about funding big entertainers and big overhead and big, glamorous things, and they want to go straight to the mission. So I think that going forward, especially for the next couple of years, you won't necessarily see the same types of events that you used to see in the not-for-profit world. And you'll see a hybrid of in-person, but also virtual, so that people that don't feel comfortable coming out can actually participate and support as well.
Real talk.
So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, huh? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
So as a, not necessarily with your organization, but for nonprofits, and this is very quickly, maybe, and all three of you can just give me an answer. What are challenges that you see for nonprofits in the rest of this year and the coming year? But at the same time, what's an opportunity that you see, or something that you're looking forward to as in the nonprofit world?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So I'll say a challenge that I see, and I think Mike just mentioned some of them, right? So how do we, and Earl mentioned it too, right? So how do you diversify your funding to make sure that you're sustainable in the months and years to come, right? You look at some of the childcare facilities, there's some nonprofits like community action agencies and others that's 90, 95% fully funded by the state and federal government. There was an organization in St. Louis, I recall. I can't remember, and I think it was the Human Development Corporation. I could be wrong. And I remember they lost their funding back in the early 2000s and had been around for over 150 years. And when they lost their state funding, they went out of business. So I think it's important that we learn how to diversify, our revenue streams. And it does get a little bit harder given, the times that we're in. And that's why you have to be able to pivot. That's why you got to be able to respond to the issues that's impacting the community and remain relevant, in those spaces. But you also got to show a little bit of courage too, right? Some of us in our roles, and I hate to say this, are cowards, right? We kind of sit back and wait for other people to take shots. I'll give an example. I remember when Michael Brown was killed in St. Louis. And I remember, I can't remember, was it Mayor Slade? Was the Mayor Slade the mayor at the time, Mike? And I remember Mayor Slade called me and asked if we would raise money in Madison to help Michael Brown's family. And I remember calling Mike, and I'm just like, I don't, given what's going on, I'm pretty sure they'll be able to bury this young man. And I think our community ended up raising $25,000. And I think a couple of universities stepped up and agreed to provide scholarships to the siblings of Michael Brown. So I get there, and I remember getting all these emails because I was on the stage with Mike McMillan, Al Sharpton, and there was a whole bunch of other national figures there. And we had announced what we did in Madison. When I got back, I had 13,000 emails. People were pissed that we had raised money in Wisconsin to help this young Black family in St. Louis, and people were calling for my resignation. And that was the first time I had seen those kinds of attacks that came at me from Black people, white people, and folks all over the country. And I remember saying Michael Brown was a Black young man just like me. And I would never apologize for being able to raise money for a young man that lost his life. And sometimes we got to be willing to sit in uncomfortable chairs when you see injustice happening in your community. You got to be able to take risk. And sometimes those risks may come back to bite you, and sometimes they might reward you when I just believe when you do the right thing, you will be blessed and you'll be blessed in the process if your intention is righteous. And I just fundamentally believe that.
Anybody else can just jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that vividly when Mike came to town and we did that presentation together. And I would just, encourage you, Mike, and Mr. Buford, and you, Pastor, and everybody that's watching. And always remember that if Jesus, Moses, Buddha, and Muhammad did not have 100% popularity when they were alive, none of us ever will have 100% popularity. So keep making those courageous moves, doing what you feel is right, because at the end of the day, we all have to look at ourselves in the mirror, and we all have to figure out what is our passion, what is our purpose, what is the reason why we do what we do. And when you look at the things that all of us have had the privilege of doing in the past year, it really reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela, when he said that it always seems impossible until it is done. And all of us have had the privilege of doing some things that we have never done before to help people when they needed it most. And we all need to keep that in mind because we sometimes underestimate the value that one leader can have and one person can have, one organization can have to make a difference. But we all should challenge ourselves to make as much difference as we possibly can with the time that we have on this earth.
That's all.
Well said. Well said. Challenge, and it's something I've been worried about, is, while we've all had great success fundraising and pivoting and raising resources, I worry about the next year when there's not a crisis. And so I've been worried about 2022 and 2023 from that standpoint. Just for those listeners out there, just keep your fiscal in house and take advantage of all that you can now, because it's going to get tighter potentially, but hopefully the pivoting we've all done will change that paradigm. But the opportunity was what Mike McMillan said earlier, is the partnerships. So we encourage, instead of starting something new, partnerships. And so from a partnership perspective, if three of us come together and go after $5 or $10 million federal grant, and then go from there, that's easier than me trying to get $500,000 from a federal department or any others. And so I really, really expound on the partnership structure and model. And speaking of Michael Brown and St. Louis Ferguson, there was such an opportunity back in 2013 when all this unrest was happening in your neighborhood, Mr. McMillan, and Detroit had its unrest, Milwaukee had its unrest, all around the same time, other cities too. So a bunch of us took the opportunity, including Mike Holmes, St. Louis, when he was running the workforce system. We decided to form an association of the workforce boards called Midwest Urban Strategies. And why that's important, it's a partnership opportunity. So now one of us could, other than run our local areas, could have a scalable approach across 10 states, across 13 cities now, and have raised about $25 million together to bring back to our local communities to support our Boys and Girls Club or support our Urban League and their job training or any other situations. So partnership opportunities is there.
Very good. Gentlemen, we only have like a couple minutes, so very quickly, what advice would you give a nonprofit or a nonprofit leader? A few seconds each.
Don't go at it by yourself. Build a strong board, a strong volunteer base. Go after the resources, diversify your revenue streams, and stay relevant in the marketplace, and follow your heart and try to do the right thing.
Ditto. Know how to adjust, listen, pivot, keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah, everything that they said. And then I would also say, on a very personal level, if you're going to really be involved in some leadership, you either need to be single or you need to have a very understanding partner.
Yeah, that's real.
Yes, God bless our spouses. And I just, personally want to give thanks to all of you, gentlemen, for everything that you guys do. Thank you for your time, your commitment. And I just want to pray that God will continue to give you the strength that you need to do the work that you're doing, that He will give you the wisdom that you need to be able to do the things that you need to do, the creativity that you need. And also that He will help you to be the spouse that you need to be, the father, the mother that you need to be. And I encourage everybody that is listening, to really reach out to some of these people if you have any questions. I know we're very busy. I know many of you guys are very busy, but the worst thing that could happen is like they say no, but reach out. I know I reach out to Michael, I reach out to other people, and I know you guys are very busy, but sometimes we need to be at the right place at the right time. And a lot of what we do, is the favor of God, but sometimes is locked in the sense of being at the right place at the right time and getting the advice from someone else. But thank you to everyone that has been listening. Thank you to you guys. Thank you to all the panelists today. It has been an amazing day. Tomorrow we're going to come back, and actually I'm going to switch it to Henry Sanders, who is going to finish the program because this is the last panel. So again, thank you, Madison 365, for giving us the opportunity to learn, to listen, to educate. And Henry Sanders, I'll pass it to you now.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for this time. This was a wonderful panel. We really, really appreciate it. It was a blessing for all the information we had. And it was just amazing to hear all the work that you gentlemen have done over the 2 pandemics going on in our country. And so it's always a blessing to hear that leaders can lead when it's a time. And what Michael said, it's not easy being a leader. It's not easy to lead in these times. But if you look across the country, people of color are stepping up in major ways to lead this country. And so I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you, Earl, for everything you're doing, brother. But you can always come back home, brother. You can always come back home. Thank you, Michael McMillan. Thank you for everything in St. Louis. And we hope to partner with you somehow in everything you're doing down there. We love everything you're doing. Thank you, Michael Johnson, for all you're doing and keep leading our county, our city, and all the things you're doing. And Marcio, thank you for all the things you're doing, brother, and keep the faith, man. We appreciate you. Today we wrapped up. We had 5 panels. Tomorrow we have 6 more panels. We're starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. So please stay tuned. Come out, check it out. Our first panel is about politics. Our lieutenant governor will be on that panel. The president of Ho Chunk will be on that panel. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful panel. Make sure you check that out. We end tomorrow on 5. But again, we have 6 panels tomorrow. For the past 2 days, so today's we'll have 11 panels or 45 panelists, all men of color. And so we hope that you can join us again tomorrow. And we'll see you early at 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. Show up, and we look forward to seeing you all. And thanks for all the panelists today and all the people watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
This is 365 Media.